If you're here, I bet you're the kind of person who really wants to understand this crazy, complicated world we live in. You want to have those aha moments without getting totally overwhelmed by a fire hose of information.
Right. And you want to understand the stuff that really matters. Well, today we're diving into something particularly important. China's just massive and growing capabilities when it comes to military AI and robotics.
I think massive is the right word. We've got a ton of material here, but our main source for this deep dive is this report called China's AI Robot Army, a deep dive into development, implications, and global impact.
That's the core of it, but we'll be weaving in insights from other articles and expert analyses as well to give you that full 360-degree view.
So our mission is to distill the most important knowledge, the really crucial stuff about how China is building this, for lack of a better term, AI-powered military. We'll be exploring the actual technologies they're pursuing, how they might use them, what the top experts are saying, and the broader global impact of it all.
Think of this as your shortcut to understanding a really critical, fast-evolving field. So buckle up.
So the report really emphasizes this concept of intelligentization as a core driver of this whole modernization effort. What exactly is that?
Intelligentization is kind of the overarching framework. What they're talking about is really the deep integration of a bunch of very powerful technologies. We're talking AI, quantum computing, big data, all of that bleeding edge stuff.
So it's not just like, oh, we'll sprinkle some AI on this and that. This is much deeper.
Way deeper. This is about fundamentally changing how they approach military power, how they think about it, how they design their forces.
And it's tied directly to some pretty ambitious goals for their military, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The report is very clear on that. Intelligentization is at the very heart of the People's Liberation Armies, the PLA's stated goal to become what they call a world-class military. And they're not shy about this. Their 2019 State Council White Paper on National Defense, that's their official strategy document, specifically mentioned intelligent warfare as a key element of this transformation.
We've heard President Xi Jinping talk a lot about mastering new technologies. How does that fit into all of this?
Well, that's actually really important context here. The report makes the point that Xi sees mastering these new technologies as China's ticket to shaping the global order, basically. He's got this vision of China as a dominant power in the 21st century.
And a big part of that is technological dominance.
Exactly. He believes, and the report emphasizes this, that having superior technology directly translates into having geopolitical power. So it's not just about military strength, it's about economics, influence, the whole package.
So what are the specific motivations behind this massive push? I mean, what are they trying to achieve?
The report breaks it down into two key areas. First, it's pretty obvious. They want to catch up to, and ultimately surpass, the U.S. and other major military powers in terms of technological capabilities. They don't want to be playing catch-up anymore. They want to set the pace.
I can see that. And the second motivation?
China has this publicly stated goal of becoming the global leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. They've been very open about that. And these military applications, they're a huge part of achieving that ambition. So it's economic competitiveness, strategic influence, and military power all tied together.
Makes sense. It really seems like the PLA sees AI as something that will completely transform the way wars are fought. Not just tweak things around the edges, but totally change the game.
That's exactly it. They view AI as the next revolution in military affairs. Not an evolution, a revolution. They see it as a technology that has the potential to completely upend the traditional ways of thinking about warfare.
Okay, so to push this all forward, the report talks about this concept called military-civil fusion. Why is that important?
Military-civil fusion is kind of their national level strategy to break down those old walls between civilian research and development and the military side of things. They're trying to make that transfer of technology, talent, resources, all of it flow really smoothly back and forth.
So they don't want these things happening in isolation.
No way! The goal is to accelerate their progress in things like AI and robotics by making sure the military can quickly adapt those innovations that are happening over in the civilian world and their tech companies and all that. And the reverse is true too. The flow goes both ways.
So it's like, if you've got a company developing, I don't know, advanced drones for package delivery, they could quickly shift gears and apply that same technology to military reconnaissance.
Exactly. It's all about creating a really agile and interconnected innovation ecosystem.
Okay, so that's the strategic side. Let's get into some specifics. What's actually been happening in terms of real-world developments and deployments?
A lot, and it's pretty eye-catching. Just recently, in February of 2025, a brigade within the PLA's 73rd Group Army did this NBC Defense and Emergency Rescue exercise. What really stands out is the equipment they used.
What did they have?
They were using unmanned aerial vehicles, those are your drones, robotic dogs, and explosive ordnance disposal robots. All of these things were operating in what they call a networked intelligent training field.
So they're suggesting these systems weren't just being controlled remotely, they were actually communicating and coordinating autonomously.
That's the implication. It points to increasingly sophisticated unmanned operations across different domains, all working together.
We keep hearing about these robotic dogs. It seems like they're popping up everywhere.
Yeah, the robotic dogs are definitely a trend. The report talks about their use in a bunch of joint exercises, like in the China-Cambodia Golden Dragon 2024 exercise and the China-Singapore Exercise Cooperation 2024. They use those robotic dogs for reconnaissance and maybe even, attack roles.
And there's that new kind of weird-looking drone they showed off, right?
Oh, yeah. During that China-Nepal Sagarmatha Friendship 2024 exercise, they unveiled this ball-shaped reconnaissance drone. It definitely caught people's attention. They're clearly testing these platforms out in all kinds of operational scenarios, seeing how they perform, how they can integrate them.
Speaking of the things that caught people's attention, Airshow China 2024 back in November was a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Lots of pretty advanced tech on display.
Huge, yeah. One of the biggest highlights was the unveiling of the Robotic Wolf Pack unmanned combat system.
Robotic Wolf Pack, that sounds intense.
Yeah, these are quadruped robots, kind of like those robotic dogs, but designed for swarm combat. They're meant to operate as a coordinated unit.
But they're not just for show.
Nope. The really important thing is they showed them off with light weapons mounted on them. That's a clear signal that they're serious about using AI-powered robots for direct combat.
I mean, a wolf pack of armed robots. I can see why that would get people's attention. Didn't we also hear some reports about China placing massive orders for drones?
Yeah, back in December 2024, there were reports saying the Chinese government had placed an order for about 1 million kamikaze drones for the PLA.
1 million. Wow.
That's a pretty clear sign that they're thinking about overwhelming adversaries with sheer numbers of unmanned systems.
So it's not all about military stuff, right? There's been some really impressive progress in the civilian sector, too, when it comes to AI and robotics.
Absolutely. A great example is that display by Unitree at the Chinese New Year Gala, where they had those humanoid robots dancing.
I saw that. Pretty impressive.
It was. More than just a cool show, though, right? It highlights their rapid advancement in humanoid robot technology.
And even though it was presented as entertainment, the report mentions that stuff has military implications, too.
Yeah. Big time. These technologies have dual-use potential. What starts as something cool and entertaining can be adapted for military use down the road.
And it seems like China might actually be ahead of some of the big names in the tech world in this area.
That's what's really interesting. The report notes that a Shanghai-based company called Agibot started mass production of general-purpose humanoid robots for commercial use back in December 2024. That might even be ahead of Tesla's timelines.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, it shows how strong their manufacturing capabilities are, which is a big advantage as this tech keeps maturing.
So let's dive into the specifics of some of these technologies. I'm really curious about the unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. What are some of the key systems they're working on?
They've got a pretty wide range of UAVs. Like the Kaihong, which means rainbow family. Those are high-altitude, long-endurance drones. They can do both reconnaissance and strike missions.
So they're the more traditional, larger drones.
Yeah, but they're also putting a lot of effort into stealth technology, like the WZ-8, which is a high-altitude, super-speed stealth reconnaissance drone.
Oh, wow. That's got to be pretty advanced.
Yeah, and then there's the Sharp Sword 11, which is a large stealth strike drone. Those are their big strategic platforms. But they're not neglecting the tactical side either.
So they're not just thinking about big strategic strikes.
No, they're thinking about how to use these things at the company level within their ground forces. They want to be able to provide close air support very quickly using drones.
Makes sense.
And they're really pushing swarm technology. The goal is to have tons of these UAVs operating together in complex, contested environments. And of course, they're also working on ways to counter other countries' drones because they know everyone else is developing this stuff too.
That makes sense. You got to be able to defend against what you can dish out, right?
Right. And there's this really interesting out-of-the-box idea they're exploring that involves their old jet fighters.
Old jet fighters. That doesn't sound very high-tech.
It's actually pretty clever. They're thinking about taking their retired second and third generation fighters, like the J7 and J8,
Right.
and basically turning them into drones.
Really? How would they do that?
They'd equip them with AI-powered self-navigation and autonomous combat systems so they can fly and fight without a pilot.
So they're creating like an unmanned air force from their old planes.
Exactly. It's a way to leverage that old hardware, make it useful again, and create this large and relatively cheap unmanned air fleet. The report calls it the Army of None.
Army of None. That's got a ring to it. All right, let's move down to the ground. What's going on with the unmanned ground vehicles, those UGVs?
Well, we've talked about the robotic dogs, and those are a big part of it. They're using them for reconnaissance, policing, inspection, and they're definitely thinking about using them in combat.
I mean, we've seen those videos of those unitary robots with rifles mounted on them, right?
Yeah, those are pretty eye-opening. There's been testing for using them to apprehend suspects and things like that, and they're developing tech to make them even harder to spot.
Like what?
Invisibility suits. They're designed to camouflage the robots from visual and thermal detection. Pretty sci-fi stuff. And then, there's the Robo Wolf, which we talked about, which is specifically designed for pack combat.
So robots fighting in packs,
Hmm.
like wolves.
That's the idea. But it's not all about these smaller quadruped robots. They're also working on larger, more traditional-looking UGVs.
Like what?
They've got this Sharp Claw series, which is pretty cool. The Sharp Claw 2 is a 1-ton armored vehicle that can operate autonomously and even deploy smaller robots.
So it's like a mothership for other robots.
Kinda, yeah. They call it a marsupial approach, where the bigger robot carries and then deploys smaller, specialized robots.
I like that marsupial. And what about the smaller robot, the Sharp Claw 1?
That one is weaponized, it's got reconnaissance tools, the whole package. But maybe the most impressive one is the mechanical yak.
Mechanical yak?
Yeah, it's this huge quadruped robot, reportedly the biggest military robot in the world.
Wow, what do they use that for?
It's designed for logistics and reconnaissance, carrying heavy loads over rough terrain. It can really change how they move supplies around.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the underwater domain. What's happening with the unmanned underwater vehicles, the UUVs?
China is putting a lot of resources into UUVs. They're using them for anti-submarine warfare, clearing mines, and even oceanographic research.
So they're recognizing that the undersea environment is becoming more and more important strategically.
Absolutely. They see it as a key battle space.
Yeah.
And UUVs are really good for that.
We touched on humanoid robots earlier, mostly in the civilian context. But what about their potential military uses?
That's where things get really interesting. Companies like Agibot, Unitree, and Fourier Intelligence, they're mostly focused on civilian stuff right now, like manufacturing and healthcare.
But the report suggests that there are some clear military applications there.
Yeah, for sure. The fact that they're getting so good at mass production and making these robots more and more sophisticated is really important. And think about it. A humanoid robot could be really useful in a military setting. They could help with logistics, support tasks, things like that.
And maybe even combat roles down the road.
Potentially, yeah. They're dexterous. They can operate in environments designed for humans. They could be incredibly versatile.
So all of these systems, the UAVs, the UGVs, the UUVs, even the humanoid robots, they're all powered by AI, right? How is AI being integrated into these military technologies?
AI is basically the brains of the operation. It's what makes all this stuff work. They're using it for autonomous navigation, target recognition, making decisions on the fly. It allows these robotic systems to be much more effective.
And it's not just in the robots themselves, right?
No, AI is being used in command and control too. They're using it to analyze huge amounts of data, trying to predict what the enemy will do and making battlefield management more efficient.
So it's not just about the hardware. It's about using AI to make better decisions faster.
Exactly. They're also developing AI-driven cyber warfare capabilities and exploring concepts like algorithmic warfare and network-centric warfare.
So with all these technologies in development, what kind of military capabilities are we likely to see from China in the next few years?
Well, I think we'll see some pretty big changes in how they conduct reconnaissance and surveillance. Think about persistent intelligence gathering in high-risk environments, using UAVs, UGVs, UUVs, all feeding information back to commanders in real time.
So they'll have a much clearer picture of what's going on all the time.
Right. And in terms of logistics and support, we could see a big shift with robots like the mechanical yak and potentially humanoid robots being used to move supplies, especially in those really tough environments. That'll reduce the risks to human personnel.
And what about combat itself? How do they see these technologies changing actual fighting?
They're looking at armed UAVs for precision strikes and close air support. Armed UGVs, like that Robo-Wolf and the weaponized robot dogs, could be used in urban combat, fighting in really complex environments. Swarm technology could allow them to overwhelm defenses just by sheer numbers.
So they're not just thinking about one-on-one engagements anymore. It's about overwhelming the enemy with swarms of robots.
That's a big part of it. And then further down the line, we might even see sophisticated humanoid robots being used in combat roles. That's still in the future, but it's something they're definitely thinking about.
Okay, so we've got this very clear picture of what they're trying to do. But what are the experts in the field saying about all this? Are they concerned?
Definitely. There's a lot of attention being paid to these developments. One defense analyst, Francis Tusica, he's made the point that China could be deploying fully autonomous weapons within the next 2 years.
2 years. It's pretty soon.
Yeah, he thinks they might actually be able to move faster than the US and other countries when it comes to getting this tech onto the battlefield.
That's a pretty sobering thought. What's the U.S. military's take on all this?
They definitely see it as a challenge. They recognize that China is integrating AI into its military in a very focused and comprehensive way, and they're worried that it could erode America's military advantage.
It's not just a technological competition, it's a geopolitical one, right?
Exactly. They see this as a potential shift in the global balance of power.
And what are the Chinese themselves saying about all this?
Well, the report notes that some Chinese scholars are arguing that advancing military AI isn't just an option, it's a necessity for them. They believe it's essential for modernizing their forces, and that it's going to fundamentally reshape the global landscape of warfare.
So they see this as a necessary step to achieve their national ambitions.
Exactly. Koichiro Takagi, an analyst at the Hudson Institute, has also weighed in. He's highlighted 4 key areas where China is focusing its military AI efforts.
What are those?
He says they're focused on making their unmanned systems more autonomous, better at processing the huge amounts of information generated in modern warfare, speeding up their decision-making, and using AI to expand state surveillance capabilities. And he also emphasizes that a lot of this technology has dual-use applications.
So what starts as a civilian technology can easily be adapted for military use.
Right. The U.S. Department of Defense is also concerned. They're particularly worried about what they call cognitive warfare.
Cognitive warfare, what's that?
It's basically the use of things like online content to influence people's perceptions and behavior, to manipulate adversaries. They think China might use generative AI for this.
So it's like a new form of propaganda, but powered by AI.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of an AI arms race.
I was just going to ask about that. I mean, with all this development happening so fast, aren't other countries going to feel pressured to keep up?
Yeah, there's a real concern that China's advancements could trigger a regional AI arms race, especially in Asia. It could lead to a lot of instability as countries scramble to catch up.
But it's not all smooth sailing for China, is it? There must be some challenges in actually making these systems work in the real world.
The Brookings Institution has made the point that even though China is throwing a lot of money and resources at this, actually deploying these systems is still hard. There are technological and organizational challenges.
Like what?
They need to test these systems rigorously, train people to operate and maintain them, and figure out how to actually use them in a real combat scenario. All of that is still a work in progress.
And the U.S. isn't just sitting back and watching all this happen right now. They've announced their own initiative to counter China.
Yeah, they've got this thing called the Replicator Initiative. It's specifically aimed at countering what they see as China's biggest advantage.
Mass. So they're trying to build lots of their own autonomous systems to keep up.
Exactly. It shows that they're taking this very seriously.
Okay, so just to get a sense of the scale and timeline here, how quickly is China aiming to build this AI-powered military force?
Their goals are pretty ambitious. They've set a target of mass-producing humanoid robots by 2025.
2025, that's only a couple of years away.
And as we discussed earlier, it looks like they're ahead of schedule in some areas. Agibot is already mass-producing humanoid robots for commercial use.
So they're not messing around.
No, the government has a clear plan. They want to have a preliminary innovation system for humanoid robotics by 2025, and then a secure and reliable industrial and supply chain system by 2027.
So they're thinking long-term, but they're moving fast.
Absolutely. And that order for 1 million kamikaze drones by the end of 2024 shows that they're ready to deploy these systems on a large scale. very soon.
And one defense analyst even predicted that they could have fully autonomous weapons on the battlefield within 2 years.
Yeah, that's the prediction. By early 2027, it's all tied to their broader strategic goals, like the Made in China 2025 initiative and the 14th five-year plan.
So this isn't just about the military. It's about China's overall economic and technological development.
Exactly. They've prioritized robotics and artificial intelligence as key drivers of their future, and they're backing it up with serious money. They expect the market for humanoid robots in China to be worth a massive 75 billion yuan by 2029.
That's huge.
And they're already the world's biggest market for industrial robots. They've got the manufacturing capacity to really ramp up production quickly. All signs point to them trying to build a very substantial AI-powered military force in the coming years.
All right, so let's put this in a global context. How does China's approach compare to what other major military powers are doing?
It's a good question. The U.S. is really focused on countering China's potential numerical advantage with that replicator initiative. They're trying to build lots of their own autonomous systems.
So it's kind of an arms race, but with robots.
In a way, yeah. The U.S. still leads in foundational AI research, but they have a more distributed industry, and they're more concerned about ethics and regulations.
What about Russia?
They've been investing more in unmanned systems and AI since 2014, especially with the conflict in Ukraine. They're mostly focused on integrating AI into their existing systems.
So they're trying to modernize their current forces with AI.
Right. But they might be behind the US and China in terms of the fundamental AI research.
And the UK and France.
The UK has their defense AI strategy, which emphasizes human-machine teaming and ethical development. They're doing a lot of testing with UGVs and UAVs, and they're really focused on doing this responsibly.
So they're trying to strike a balance between developing these powerful technologies and making sure they're used ethically.
Exactly. France is trying to become a leader in military AI in Europe. They've got their droid program for ground robots, and they're focused on developing their own AI algorithms. They're also interested in lethal weapon systems with integrated autonomy.
So they're not shying away from the potential of AI in combat.
No, not at all. But it seems like the biggest difference between China and these other countries is the sheer speed and scale of their efforts and their willingness to push the boundaries.
So what does all this mean for the future? What's the potential impact of China developing this AI-powered military force?
It's a big question. I think it has the potential to really shake things up, both regionally and globally. If China gets a significant lead in military AI, it could change the balance of power in the Western Pacific, especially when it comes to Taiwan and the South China Sea.
So it could make them much more assertive in those areas.
Yeah, potentially. And it could lead to more conflicts. There's also the risk of a global AI arms race, with other countries feeling like they need to catch up.
And that could make the world a much more dangerous place.
It could. It's not just about the big powers either. Countries in the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean, like Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, they're all going to have to adapt.
And there's the whole issue of proliferation, right?
Right. What happens if China starts exporting this technology to other countries or even to non-state actors? That could really destabilize things and lead to human rights abuses.
And the nature of war itself could change.
Absolutely. AI-powered weapons could make conflicts much faster, much more unpredictable. There's a real risk of miscalculation and escalation.
And we don't really have any international rules or norms for this kind of technology yet.
That's another big concern. The existing arms control agreements don't really address this stuff, and it's really hard to establish new norms when the technology is developing so fast. So yeah, China's push for an AI-powered military has the potential to really change things in ways we can't fully predict.
It's a lot to think about. So just to wrap things up, today we've really explored this remarkable and frankly kind of scary push by China to transform its military with AI and robotics. We've looked at the specific technologies they're developing, from those advanced drones and ground robots to those ambitious humanoid robot programs. And we've heard from a range of experts who are, sounding the alarm about the potential consequences of all this.
And it's all happening really fast. China is moving quickly, they're investing heavily, and they seem determined to achieve their goals. The implications for global security, for regional stability, for the very future of warfare are truly enormous.
So we'll leave you with this thought. As AI becomes more and more powerful, and as it's integrated more and more deeply into military systems, what does that mean for human control over the use of force? What does it mean for the future of peace and stability? These are the big questions we all need to be grappling with.
These aren't easy questions, and there are no easy answers, but they're questions we can't afford to ignore. This is a rapidly evolving field, and we all need to stay informed and engaged.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll keep you updated as this story develops.